Very good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for tuning in. I'm Sneha Koshy, and you're watching Beyond the Headline. Well, it's a topic straight from our hearts, up the mirror now, anti-completely. Ladies and gentlemen, it comes as no surprise, but it's backed with data and a detailed analysis this time. Homes with children under 14 years of age have women increasingly opting out of the workforce. Add to this elderly care, and this is much more in urban India than the rural India. Experts say family pressures are the big differentiator, and it's more for women between the age of 20 to 35 compared to later years. Again, closely linked to childbearing years, perpetuated by childcare or the lack of it, and increasing nuclear families. Well, this is an analysis of the periodic labor force survey from 2017-18 to 2022-23, also including the COVID period. But what does this mean for the 2025 India? And who better to take us through this than the member of the Economic Advisory Panel to the Prime Minister, Dr. Shamika Ravi, who's also a co-author of this analysis. Thank you very much, Dr. Shamika Ravi, for joining us. Thank you for giving us your time. A very, very important issue at hand. My first question, Dr. Shamika, women with children below 14 of years have lower participation in workforce in urban India. What does this mean for 2025 India?
Well, let me tell you, for most traditional families, for most traditional societies across the world, this is a problem that they have had to live through. And as you might have noticed, most of them have ended up with crashing fertility. And it has to do with the fact that, as women get more education, they get more training, the opportunity cost of staying at home with all that training is very high. So the wages foregone or professional career, whatever choices which they are getting trained for. Unfortunately, in a society where women are getting all this education and training, but we are fast nuclearizing and we are fast urbanizing, it means that the entire, the cost, what we call the burden of care for children as well as elderly, while you haven't asked me about the elderly, but care really includes children and the elderly. And the cost of all of that really is borne by the women in the family. One of our data, if you look at the time use data from India, it tells us that an average working woman from the age of, let's say, 18 to 59 spends around 5.5, 6 hours taking care of someone every day, right? And this is true for women who are also working, by the way. It's not, significantly different whether you are at home or you're working outside. So basically, it tells you that, it's a costly venture. Having kids, it's time consuming. And we need to provide with institutional support if we care for children and healthy society.
Interestingly, this gap is more pronounced in urban India than rural India, according to your analysis. Is this more to do with support systems?
The reason we did this study is because for the longest time, we have a very rich literature which has tried to explain decline in women labor force participation in India, right? Except if you look at the last 7, 8 years, there has been a major resurgence. In fact, we are back to the early 2000s, that level, right? So there has been a reversal or a resurgence in female labor force participation, but a majority of that resurgence has really happened in rural areas. In urban area, you have seen an increase, but when you slice the data and you try to see across age groups and across different factors like, married versus unmarried, men versus women, of course, that's a big difference. But if you look at children under 14, in the household, then urban women are affected significantly than rural women. In fact, the surprising thing is, marriage doesn't have as much of an effect as having, kids in the household. And it makes sense. Intuitively, it makes sense that in urban areas, because you have, traditional family structures are breaking down very fast, and we don't have a replacement. Which is where we have to think of reducing the burden on women, reducing the cost on women, because in urban areas it's far more. And I think the family support and institutional support is lacking, and that is why I think urban areas is far worse. In fact, in rural areas too, you see a data, but urban is significantly.
So practically, if we have women missing at the mid-level at workspaces in India, in urban India, which automatically should mean that at the managerial level, at the senior level, it's going to be much lesser and a much lesser pay parity. Is this correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, if you look at the age for which having a child has a major impact, it's not for a lot older women. So after 40s, actually, the difference isn't that much. And before 20, it doesn't make sense, right? So the bigger gap is between 20 and 35 is when having a kid in the family has a disproportionately high cost for women in urban areas. So you're exactly right. This is the age when you enter the labor market, you're entering the workforce and you're starting your working outside the house. Now, I think the bigger implications, Sneha, which we have to have a very honest conversation with, is that, care has to be shared. That's number one. Traditional roles, traditional institution of families and intergenerational support where grandparents are around and so on, that is not true anymore, right? So urbanization is also leading to nuclearization, which means a mother and the father raising two kids. That's the average structure today. And because childcare is very labor intensive, given the traditional roles, the women are stepping back. Right? We don't know if, obviously it could be a happy choice for some, but it's not always a happy choice, which means we have to, as a policy implication, we have to think of how do we lower this burden. So what kind of care support can be provided through policy interventions? One, through the state. So we start investing much more in creches and daycares. But the second is also to sort of support and incentivize private sector to invest in this sector, right? And you have an aging population, 120 million people above the age of 60. All of that population also needs care, right? So we have to make it easier for women to be able to balance these things. And of course, the men have to share the burden.
Now, so that's my question. No, so that's my question. Now, why should you, in fact, let's go through this first. You've been hearing this entire conversation, I'm sure, about work hours, 70 hours of work or X number of hours of work, and that's the number of hours that Indians must put in. And then you have somebody comes in and says, but there is work-life balance that's hugely important. Here's the big point, and that is, for most of women, work-life balance isn't a privilege. It is a necessity. And so honestly, for women, when you look at it with that spectrum, isn't it automatically at a disadvantageous point?
Well, some industries are more prone to what we call in economics, for instance, in corporate finance, you would call it face time, iBanking, lawyers. Mostly, by the way, a knowledge industry, highly skilled, etc. They are prone to this face time culture where you just have to be around to be of value to the firm. They might not be actually working all the time, but it is a problem both for men and women. Basically, it means you are taking away that much time from family time, right? From taking care of folks within the household, the dependent population, so to say. I think the problem largely, Sneha, is that, we don't value this nature of care. And we estimated it to be around 17% of GDP. That's the kind of value which is getting created in the household by women providing this care. And the reason we did it is not to, monitor. It's just a value. You want to get a sense of what is the kind of value which is getting created in the household. And the reason perhaps people don't realize it and frankly don't value it, including family members, right? And often homemakers and mothers, mothering or caring, these are these are things which are often discounted, looked down on. This is not seen as a great, value addition to the economy or the society, but this is of tremendous value. This is a significant value which keeps stability and harmony within societies. And one of the reasons why we have seen significantly, crashing fertility rates in a lot of these traditional societies is that when women enter labor force, you're working outside and you're working at home. Working women in India, if you look at the time, they have the least amount of leisure time, right? They really don't have any time for themselves. So having fewer kids or dropping out of the workforce is a very rational choice from their behalf. But as an economist, as someone who's thinking of, well, where is future growth, and you have such a large proportion of your workforce which is trapped after all this skill, they don't have a choice. At which point we have to provide all this support, which also, by the way, addresses the question of the corporate culture or the work culture that you are alluding to. We'll just have to enforce better work culture, right? HR policies will have to incorporate family-friendly policies.
No, but then here's the question. Why should a corporate or an HR team even opt for it? Why should they choose this? Look at this. If there are two people who have come for a particular job, irrespective of gender, if there is one who possibly can put in more hours, is available for everything, irrespective of the productivity for that matter, but is available more, has less liabilities, has less burden, so as to speak, is more available for work, why wouldn't a corporate or an HR choose that person over the other? That's a very fair, simple question, particularly in today's time where we are having layoffs, where we are having the economic burdens and companies are cost cutting.
Yeah. No, you're right. In fact, that is the reason that when we moved from 3 months to 6 months, you did see several industries cut back on recruitment of women. They really substituted away from women, and they said, 6 months of paid leave is too costly for particularly mid-sized or smaller firms, right? So I see this as a rational response. But Sneha, this is the time where I think economies or societies more broadly need to have an honest conversation. After all, the most affluent economy in the world, in the US, you have a minimum number of paid maternity leave. So extreme, commercial interest, if you only look at profit as an outcome of, or the growth of a firm or the stock value of the firm as the only means of looking at final outcome, then, there is a dissonance between what society values and what is a narrow short-term, it's not even short-term, it's really quarter-to-quarter interest. And soon you're going to be straddled with extremely rising labor costs. So it's really a matter of time. In the US, or look at the G7 countries, where they do face a lot of these shortages on account of falling fertility, they have opened up migration and particularly high-skilled migration, etc. I don't think we have, we have those kind of options available for us right now. And more importantly, it's not, again, just from an economic perspective. I think harmony in society. And frankly, changing the role. And you are going to see, by the way, a lot of transition happen where men, and this might sound sort of counterintuitive, because in India, traditionally, boys have been raised to be entitled and so on. But that's changing very fast. Men are also under tremendous pressure. And family is of value, right? I mean, you're still a very traditional society. So you see care and the whole idea of family time and people being productive, but at the same time being given days off. So recently when I heard that, an expression of, how many hours do you want to stare at your wife's face, for instance? I mean, I just read something while I was traveling earlier today. And it struck me that, but that's such a myopic way to look at it, because it's not your wife's face that you are at home to look at. It's to also take care of the children, right? And the kids, which is really the most labor-intensive part of it. And a lot of young men, part of the reason there is stress is I don't think they're getting sufficient family time. By the way, just in terms of number of hours, Indians actually work some of the longest hours on an average across the world.
So, Dr. Shamika, what's the way ahead?
Well, the fact that, we have to talk about investing in care infrastructure, right? Because when traditional family structure breaks down, it is usually replaced by the state. The state begins to provide different kinds of welfare and sort of infrastructure and support, right? The problem is that we are at a very nascent stage where fertility, urban India has had below replacement fertility for 25 years now. And I think a lot of aspects of labor market decisions, whether for men and women, but I think particularly for women, which appears to be an enigma when people think of why isn't women labor force participation in India very high, despite the recent surge, is it's a very large country. Urban and rural are very different markets. And you need to study labor markets in highly, within context. So no two states are identical. In fact, when you look at female labor force and the kind of Haryana, Punjab, two of your richer states, have similar levels of female labor force participation as, let's say, Bihar. And these are all very low. So, general notion that we have that in richer places, women work more, or in poorer places, women might be forced to work more. None of those lazy theories actually hold. So if you want to understand India's labor market, you want to understand society and how women and sort of differences over age or having children, how does marriage affect? A lot of these things have to be studied at the state level at most. Whenever we look at national level averages, it really doesn't mean very much. There's nothing really useful that comes out of all India averages. And that's why variations across age, family with children, without children, aging population, they're all realities today. And that's how we should really look at it for policy implications.
Well, Dr. Shamika, thank you very much for your time. It's been a privilege to have you. And as they say, every crisis has an opportunity. While data is hugely important, and we are glad that there is this analysis because it just backs it with numbers and a very economic perspective. But also in this crisis lies a huge lot of opportunities, not only for employment and employment generation, but also to ensure that there is a large part of the population in terms of a gender having access to equal opportunities. Thank you very much, Dr. Shamika, for joining us. Well, I'm being joined at this point by Mr. Yogesh Pondicherry, who's a head of D&Q Binds, as well as Meeta Chakrabarti, who's an IT entrepreneur and politician. Thank you very much, both of you. Well, Ms. Meeta Chakrabarti, my first question to you. So I'm sure this analysis doesn't come as a surprise. Instinctively, intuitively, all of us at some level know what happens at households, particularly in urban India. Meeta Chakrabarti, when you look around at yourself, your journey, and women around, what's the biggest challenge that you have at this point? And it's important for me to get a perspective from you because you have 2 children and I'm told they are under the age of 14. So it's literally a study about women like you and like me.
Okay, good evening to all your viewers. Just one correction. My elder daughter is 19 and not 14, but my younger one is also just 15. So they're not below 14 anymore. And thank God for that. But coming back to today's topic.
But you've sailed through that phase. But let's just talk about that phase nonetheless.
Yes, absolutely. I was just going through a report of Ministry of Labor and Employment, which talks about female participation in labor and workforce in India. And they had cited many reasons as why there had been some females who have dropped out of the workforce. And the number one reason happens to be, no surprises there, childcare and homemaking commitments. That comprises to 44.5% of the total 100% reasons as why a lady who has been working decides to quit her job. And if you compare that with the men who have dropped out of the workforce, it's only 0.8%. The number one reason for men dropping out or quitting a job is 70% of the reason is that they want to pursue higher education. That comes as number 2. So we have other reasons like health and age.
While you're quoting these studies, I want to try and understand your journey. Has it been part of this? Does it reflect this? Or has it been an exception? Because today you're introduced as an IT entrepreneur as well as a politician. But what's been your journey when you look at these studies?
I will talk about my journey, but I wanted to reflect on the overall nature of the society as well as why women are struggling because there is lack of proper childcare facilities. The societal mindset needs to change, and there has to be more shared responsibility with the partner. It should not be deemed as only a mother's job to raise children. I have been fortunate because my partner was extremely supportive as far as parenting responsibilities were concerned. So, but I would, when I look at this data and when I look at people around me, I think that's more of an exception rather than the rule. And I think that needs to change. And not only that needs to change, but the overall care
So,
facility,
so
the
in your
working
journey,
environment.
was it critical that you got not just a partner's support, which is extremely important of what you're saying, but also institutional support, family support? How did it work out for you to be an
So,
exception?
big part of my children growing up happened abroad, not in this country. And there is good childcare facilities available in Europe, and you tend to engage and you tend to depend on the professionals a lot, and even the state provides you with that kind of facilities and working environment. What needs to be looked at here is that when you have different corporation organizations, be it government or non-government, we really need to look at how we can provide more flexible working hours, whether people can work remotely, whether women can work from home in certain areas. I know in all industry verticals it is not possible, but where possible, can they work remotely? Whether there can be more childcare facilities provided, either by the state or by the employer. So
Sure.
we have to think out of the box because if you do
Okay.
not have, because having significant amount of female participation in labor force is very important for inclusive and sustainable growth of the entire nation. And when we see as childcare and homemaking
Okay.
commitment being the
At this
one
point,
reason, we really need to relook as how we are looking at this entire structure of childcare and supporting a female who is working.
absolutely. Yogesh Pondicherry, if I can get you in, and here's where you come in. You're the head of D&Q Binds. Now, you just heard a co-panelist talk about a very important part, and that is she had her children, she was raising her children abroad, where there was great childcare facility. What happens to people, to women who are working in organizations, say like yours or others, in India, where childcare facility isn't really institutionalized all across the board?
Yeah, Sneha, thanks for having me, first of all. And Nita, thank you for really commenting on a real issue that, we all acknowledge. The women labor force is very critical for us, and we value the women workforce. And, as corporates, we make every effort to make the women labor force, um, you know, uh, have access to childcare, facilities, have access to flexibility. That is something that we really focus on. As a corporate, personally at Binds, we are thinking of doing, providing that facilities for our women workforce at Binds, and they bring in a lot of value, right? Think about it. As a woman, they are the primary caregivers at home, and the fact that they have to make a choice whether to continue the careers or really take care of the child. So we have to make every effort as corporate to really give them the support. And I acknowledge that we don't have
And
that
that's
support
what I
in
would
India,
like to
but
know. I
as
mean, when you look at
sorry, go ahead.
what's the steps, while a lot has to be done, and I think everybody acknowledges that, we're trying to understand what's being done. So Mr. Yogesh Pondicherry, here's
Yeah.
the question. We had Dr. Shamika a while ago from the EAC to the Prime Minister, a member of that, and she went on to say that HRs must be open, must be flexible for child care facilities to be partnered, to be share partnered, and to allow women the flexibility to get them in at spaces and times that are possible for them. Here's my question to you. If you have two people with the same set of skills, and irrespective of gender, if there's one that comes with a lesser baggage, lesser liability, and one seen as a primary caregiver, who would you opt for? If the
See, I
other
wouldn't
two are
look.
absolutely fine, if the other two are absolutely on the same pedestal?
Sneha, the way I look at it is, I'm gender agnostic when it comes to this, right? I just see what value that person brings in. And as a woman, right, if you think about it, they are primary caregivers. And, once they come back, once they have a child, they're juggling both taking care of the child at home and also the work. So think about the passion that they bring to work, the commitment that that they have. I don't have any qualms talking about it, but, the women are generally more committed than men. I've seen it. And we make every effort to really provide all the flexibility and the childcare facilities that they need. We're working on it personally at my organization. We're looking at how to make their work life better.
Right. But again, I mean, I'm coming to you again at it, and I'm literally not asking you for your organization, but as a person who heads organizations, as a person who drives the HR for organizations, is it economically practical to ensure that what is seen as a platform that must support women who have the equal potential, skill, talent, capability as their male counterparts, particularly in those crucial years, say 10 to 20 to 30 or 20 to 35, as it were? Do you see it is economically viable at times such as this in India, where there are layoffs also being reported and cost cutting for that matter across corporates?
Yeah, I mean, Sneha, the way I look at it, right? I will really make every effort to retain my employees, right? Because the cost of hiring is much higher. So I'll make every effort. So while you say whether it's economically viable, I would say yes. I rather give them the flexibility, the facilities to really continue their jobs, because cost of hiring is much higher the way I see it. So my personal opinion is, I would really go out of the way to provide that, facilities and flexibility basically.
Meeta Chakrabarti, we had a spell of COVID, and in the pandemic of COVID, if I may correct myself, it was often seen that women again had a whole lot of burden upon them when it came to childcare. I'm not saying that other members, men for that matter, did not partake. There were many households where the system worked with both of them taking it forward, but largely it was seen imbalanced, and it was also very clearly reflected in the workforce. So today, how should women have this conversation around them, Meeta Chakrabarti? What would you tell them, considering you're well past that stage and still managing to be in the workforce?
Well, I think honesty is the best approach. You need to be honest with yourself as what can be done, because we all have 24 hours in our day. And we need to be honest with the people we are working with, be it our clients, be it our employer, be it with the government, with all the stakeholders. We need to honestly suggest that this is the kind of working environment we need. You're very right about the cost of employment. Though there's a cost of recruitment, there's a cost of training, there's a cost of hiring. Having said that, all organizations, the corporates, they are primarily focused, and rightfully so, in making a profit. Every financial year, they have their own shareholders to answer back, their own board to answer back. So if, for example, to a recruiter, to a person who is hiring, if the cost of hiring a female employee in that age group is much higher than hiring a male employee with the same credential, with the same skill sets, then often it may happen that there can be a bias against hiring a female employee in that age group. So I think it's very important that the government also steps in and give certain incentives to people who have a better gender equation and a better gender balance in their workplace. Because at the end of the day, when you have a more balanced workforce, you have more creativity, you have enhanced productivity, and you have a better working environment overall. So it may actually give you more dividend in the long run.
I think we really, there's so much more to discuss, but I'm being told by my director we are totally out of time. I just wish we had more time. But Meeta Chakrabarti, thank you very much for your perspective, as well as Yogesh Pondicherry. Thank you very much for your perspective. Some very, very important points, and of course, some huge, crucial maneuvering that India really needs to do. Time for a very short break. On the other side, my colleague Shreya Upadhyay will take you through all the latest.